Hey folks, history is a brutal fact checker. Let's break down 27 presidential decisions that time exposed.
History class told us presidents were geniuses. Turns out, half of them were just very confident men guessing in real time. 1. George Washington's tooth disaster. Let's start at the top. Literally, America's first president had dental problems so bad, the Smithsonian could probably classify his mouth as a construction zone. Washington's infamous dentures weren't made of wood like the myth says. They were a Frankenstein mix of ivory, brass, human teeth, and possibly donkey molars. Each time he smiled, it was like a small symphony of suffering. The dentures caused constant pain, so his portraits always show that tight, dignified frown. Not stoicism, just agony. He even had to use wax to reshape his jawline so he'd look normal under those powdered wigs. The punchline? His obsession with dental innovation made him invest in one of the earliest forms of mouth prosthetics, which probably gave him lead poisoning. Nothing says father of the nation like founding both democracy and America's first toxic smile. 2. Thomas Jefferson's mammoth cheese diplomacy. Jefferson believed in liberty, reason, and apparently 1,200-pound dairy products. In 1802, a group of New England farmers sent him a massive wheel of cheese, literally the size of a car, as a gift to celebrate religious freedom. Jefferson, ever the philosopher, accepted it and proudly displayed it in the White House. But no one considered the fact that the thing would start rotting. Visitors reported a smell so foul it could probably dissolve wigs. For months, the mammoth cheese became the White House's worst foreign policy problem, especially since Jefferson insisted it was a symbol of American unity. By the time it was gone, his staff had developed a national trauma around dairy. The morale of the story? Never mix Enlightenment ideals with unrefrigerated cheese. 3. Andrew Jackson's funeral for his pet parrot. Andrew Jackson's presidency was basically one long bar fight that somehow counted as democracy. So it's no surprise that his death would also turn into a fiasco. When Jackson finally kicked the bucket in 1845, mourners gathered for his grand funeral, complete with his beloved pet parrot, Pole. But Pole wasn't exactly the grieving type. Mid-ceremony, the bird began screeching at full volume, unleashing a storm of profanity so obscene that ministers had to stop the service and remove it from the church. Eyewitnesses said the parrot's swearing was shocking and unfit for ears polite. The man had managed to train his pet to curse like a sailor, probably at Congress. And in death, Jackson's legacy was perfectly summed up by his bird, loud, angry, and completely out of order. 4. James Madison's tiny army problem. James Madison is known as the father of the Constitution. Unfortunately, he was also the reluctant father of one of the dumbest military plans in U.S. history. When the War of 1812 broke out, Madison decided to invade Canada, with an army smaller than a modern football crowd. He genuinely believed Canadians would greet Americans as liberators. Instead, they greeted them with musket fire and polite fury. The invasion collapsed faster than a folding chair at a barbecue. To make matters worse, Washington, D.C. was left completely undefended, so the British just walked in, burned down the White House, and left like it was a casual Tuesday. Madison fled into the woods carrying the Constitution and whatever national dignity remained. His wife, Dolly, famously saved George Washington's portrait from the flames because, unlike her husband, she actually understood crisis management. Madison's plan turned invade Canada into one of history's most embarrassing sentences. 5. Franklin Pierce's presidential party foul. Franklin Pierce might be the only president whose biggest accomplishment was surviving his own inauguration day. Barely. In 1853, during his big debut as America's new leader, Pierce decided to celebrate with a horseback parade through Washington, D.C. The problem? He was spectacularly drunk and not particularly good at staying on a horse. Halfway down Pennsylvania Avenue, he lost control, almost trampled a crowd, and then dramatically fell off while shouting about destiny. It was the kind of performance that makes Secret Service agents wish time travel existed. Pierce spent the rest of his term proving that the fall wasn't a metaphor, but it might as well have been. He managed to alienate his own party, ignore the country's growing division, and drink through most of his presidency. When asked later what went wrong, one historian summarized it perfectly. Pierce fell off the horse and never got back on. 6. Ulysses S. Grant's speeding ticket. Most people get a parking ticket, Ulysses S. Grant got arrested for speeding on a horse. In 1872, while serving as president, Grant was tearing through Washington, D.C. in his carriage like he was late to Appomattox. A police officer stopped him for reckless driving, not realizing he was addressing the commander-in-chief. When Grant politely introduced himself, the officer hesitated for all of 2 seconds before saying, "I'm sorry, Mr. President, but you're under arrest." Grant reportedly laughed, admitted guilt, and paid the $20 fine, the 19th century equivalent of a celebrity doing community service. It became national news. The hero of the Civil War humbled by a traffic cop. But the real punchline came from the officer, who explained, "I would arrest my own mother for speeding." So, for one glorious moment in American history, the law actually applied equally to everyone, even the president. Grant's horse, however, was unavailable for comment. 7. Herbert Hoover and the Great Depression Diet. If optimism could solve hunger, Herbert Hoover would have been a visionary. When the stock market imploded in 1929, Hoover looked at mass unemployment, breadlines, and national despair, and concluded that people just needed to work harder. His brilliant economic plan? Do nothing and hope the economy politely fixed itself. Meanwhile, millions of Americans were literally starving. Families built shacks out of scrapwood and called them Hoovervilles because even poverty had better branding than the president. Reporters asked if the government would intervene. Hoover said no, claiming that prosperity is just around the corner. Spoiler, it wasn't. By the time he left office, Hoover had become a verb, meaning to ruin something beyond repair. He started as an engineer known for efficiency and ended as the face of economic despair. His legacy is proof that when your plan for fixing the economy is cross your fingers, history will never forgive you. 8. Richard Nixon's space crimes contingency. Richard Nixon might have been the most paranoid man ever to hold office, so naturally, he prepared for the moon landing by writing a eulogy. His staff drafted a secret speech titled, "In Event of Moon Disaster," meant to be read if Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin died on the lunar surface. It detailed how NASA would end communication and let the astronauts rest in peace. The memo even planned for a priest to perform a televised committal ceremony as their oxygen ran out. Nixon rehearsed it just in case, proving that even during humanity's proudest moment, he was mentally preparing for a cover-up. Thankfully, the landing succeeded, and Nixon got to call the moon instead of mourning it. But imagine being the president who had to decide between "Congratulations, you did it," and "So, about that space funeral." Only Nixon could make one small step for man sound like a PR crisis waiting to happen. 9. Andrew Johnson's drunken swearing-in. When Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, America expected a strong leader to heal the nation. Instead, it got Andrew Johnson, a man who couldn't even stay sober long enough to take the oath of office. During his vice presidential inauguration in 1865, Johnson decided that the best way to calm his nerves was with a few drinks. A few became several. By the time he stumbled up to the podium, he was slurring his words, shouting at Congress, and bragging about how great he'd be at his new job. Witnesses described it as deeply embarrassing, which in 19th century terms means a total train wreck. When Lincoln was assassinated just weeks later, Johnson took over as president, but his first impression was already set in stone, America's first leader to give a drunk acceptance speech. He spent the rest of his presidency proving sobriety wasn't his only problem, managing to get impeached by his own party for being equally terrible at politics. 10. Warren G. Harding's love letters and corruption. Scandal. Warren G. Harding wanted to be remembered as a man of the people. Instead, history remembers him as a man of too many people, especially the ones he wasn't married to. During the early 1920s, Harding's presidency was a non-stop soap opera of bribery, gambling, and extramarital drama. While his cabinet looted the government in what became known as the Teapot Dome scandal, Harding was busy writing thousands of steamy love letters to his mistress, Nan Britton. He mailed them from the Oval Office, using government stationery. The letters were later published, featuring poetry so bad it deserves its own criminal trial. "I love you more than all the words of all the books." Actual quote. By the time he died suddenly in 1923, half the nation was mourning while the other half was trying to calculate how much tax money had been spent on hotel rooms. 11. Lyndon B. Johnson's bathroom politics. Lyndon B. Johnson didn't believe in privacy. Not for himself, and definitely not for his staff. The man conducted full cabinet discussions from the bathroom, with the door open. He even had a custom phone installed next to his toilet so he could yell at senators mid-flush. His aides called these sessions Johnson briefings, but everyone else just called them traumatic. He was also famous for giving what he called the Johnson treatment, invading your personal space, towering over you, and talking so close you could count his dental fillings. During one meeting, he cornered a congressman and said, "Son, you ever been talked into something by a man taking a leak? That's not leadership. That's a hostage situation." Still, his bathroom diplomacy somehow worked. He pushed through landmark civil rights legislation while probably holding a towel in one hand and a phone in the other. History's weirdest multitasker. 12. John F. Kennedy's Bay of Pigs. Fiasco. John F. Kennedy had charm, charisma, and one of the dumbest military plans ever conceived. In 1961, he approved the Bay of Pigs invasion, a top-secret CIA mission to overthrow Fidel Castro by sending a few hundred poorly trained Cuban exiles to storm a beach full of Cuban soldiers. The plan relied on two things: surprise and logic. It had neither. The moment the invaders landed, they were surrounded, captured, and broadcast on international TV. It was like watching an action movie directed by accountants. Kennedy publicly took responsibility, privately fumed at the CIA, and learned the hard way that what could possibly go wrong is not a solid foreign policy strategy. On the bright side, it taught him to distrust the intelligence community, a lesson he'd carry into the Cuban Missile Crisis when he somehow managed to save the world without any beach-based disasters. Practice makes perfect, apparently. 13. William Howard Taft's bathtub incident. William Howard Taft was a big man, 350 pounds of presidential gravity. Unfortunately, the White House wasn't built for that much executive mass. In 1909, while taking a bath, Taft got stuck, as in physically wedged. The story became legend, the President of the United States calling for help because he couldn't escape his own bathtub. Several aides were summoned, and after much pushing, pulling, and praying, they freed him. Mortified, Taft immediately ordered a new, custom-built tub so large it could fit 4 men comfortably. Reporters called it the Titanic of bathtubs, which was probably not the metaphor he wanted in 1912. To his credit, Taft had a sense of humor about it, later saying, "I could have taken 2 more states if I could have fit through more doorways," a true pioneer of self-awareness and reinforced plumbing. 14. Ronald Reagan's Star Wars plan. Ronald Reagan looked at nuclear war and said, "What if we solved this with lasers?" In 1983, he unveiled the Strategic Defense Initiative, nicknamed Star Wars, a plan to build an orbital defense system capable of shooting down Soviet missiles from space. It sounded like something out of a Flash Gordon comic, and that's exactly how scientists reacted. Experts told Reagan it was impossible with current technology. Reagan told them to think bigger. The US spent billions researching a space shield that never worked, but it did freak out the Soviets enough to accelerate peace talks, proving that science fiction diplomacy occasionally pays off. The real punchline? Some of the research actually led to modern laser guidance systems, meaning Reagan's half-baked space fantasy accidentally helped invent real defense tech. Sometimes delusion is just innovation wearing sunglasses. 15. Jimmy Carter's Killer Rabbit Incident. In 1979, America faced inflation, an energy crisis, and international tension. Naturally, the president's biggest scandal involved a rabbit. While fishing in Georgia, Jimmy Carter was suddenly attacked by what he described as a swimming, hissing rabbit charging toward his boat. Carter panicked, splashed water at it, and later told reporters about his near-death experience with the aquatic furball. The press went wild. Headlines screamed, "President fends off killer rabbit." Political cartoonists drew him fighting cartoon bunnies for months. Foreign leaders probably thought America had lost its mind. And maybe we had. The White House tried to downplay it, but photos surfaced, confirming it actually happened. Carter was a decent man with bad luck, and the killer rabbit became the ultimate symbol of a presidency where even nature refused to cooperate. 16. Calvin Coolidge's Silent Presidency. Calvin Coolidge was the human embodiment of a screensaver. His nickname, Silent Cal, wasn't ironic. It was a public service announcement. The man believed saying less meant doing less wrong, and by that measure, he was a genius. Coolidge once hosted a dinner where he uttered exactly 2 words: "Pass butter." When a reporter bet she could make him say more than 3 words, he replied, "You lose." That was the whole conversation. As president, he perfected the art of napping through crises, claiming that 9 out of 10 problems disappear if you ignore them. America was roaring through the 1920s while Coolidge was busy perfecting his poker face. He loved to pose for photos with farm animals, but hated speeches. When he finally announced he wouldn't seek re-election, he did it with one sentence: "I do not choose to run." That was Coolidge in a nutshell, a man who turned presidential apathy into performance art and made history by doing almost nothing spectacularly well. 17. Theodore Roosevelt's bulletproof speech. In 1912, former President Theodore Roosevelt was giving a campaign speech in Milwaukee when a would-be assassin shot him in the chest. Most people would cancel the speech. Roosevelt, being Roosevelt, checked the wound, saw there was no blood coming from his mouth, and declared, "It takes more than that to kill a bull moose." He then proceeded to speak for 90 minutes, with a bullet still lodged in his ribcage. The only reason he survived was because the bullet had been slowed down by his 50-page speech folded in his pocket. When doctors later insisted he go to the hospital, he grumbled, "It takes more than 1 bullet to shut me up." Roosevelt's toughness was legendary, but this moment made him a walking myth. Modern politicians can't handle a bad tweet. Roosevelt took a bullet and still finished his PowerPoint. America's most caffeinated president, ladies and gentlemen. 18. John Quincy Adams and the nude morning swim. John Quincy Adams was a Harvard scholar, diplomat, and apparently part-time nudist. Every morning he took a naked swim in the Potomac River at dawn, because nothing says leader of the free world like skinny dipping in government water. He did it for health reasons, though neighbors probably had other opinions. One morning, journalist Anne Royal wanted an interview, but Adams refused, so she simply sat on his clothes until he agreed to talk. That's right, the first recorded instance of a woman interviewing a president happened while he was trapped, naked, in a river. Adams later praised the encounter as spirited, which is one way to describe public blackmail by towel theft. The 1820s were truly a different time. No press secretary, no PR team, just one determined woman and a president with nothing to hide. Literally. 19. Bill Clinton's saxophone diplomacy. Bill Clinton didn't just want to be president, he wanted to be cool. In 1992, during his campaign, he appeared on the Arsenio Hall show wearing sunglasses and playing the saxophone. It worked. Voters loved it. They said he was relatable, smooth, fun, the anti-politician politician. Unfortunately, that charm would also be his undoing. His charisma turned the Oval Office into a gossip tabloid when his relationships offstage became the main act. Clinton's presidency gave us economic growth, yes, but also the phrase, "it depends on what the meaning of the word is." He was impeached not for war or corruption, but for an affair and a lie that would have been better kept inside a blues song. Still, historians admit, no one ever balanced scandal and swagger quite like him. Bill Clinton proved that in American politics, you can survive almost anything, as long as you play a decent sax solo. 20. George W. Bush and the pretzel incident. Being president is hard work. You're juggling wars, the economy, and global diplomacy. But George W. Bush reminded everyone that danger can also come from the snack aisle. In 2002, while watching a football game in the White House, Bush choked on a pretzel, passed out, and hit his head on the coffee table. The leader of the free world, taken down by processed carbs. Secret Service agents rushed in, only to find him bruised but alive, thanks to the Heimlich maneuver of gravity. The press had a field day. President Bush in stable condition after snack attack. He handled it with humor, saying, "When you're eating pretzels, chew before you swallow. Trust me." The man survived 9/11, 2 wars, and international criticism, but almost didn't survive Frito-Lay. Historians might debate his policies, but everyone agrees. Bush won the war on terror, lost the battle with a pretzel. 21. Barack Obama's tan suit scandal. In 2014, Barack Obama gave a press conference wearing, brace yourself, a tan suit. America lost its collective mind. News anchors called it disrespectful, unpresidential, and even a national disgrace. You'd think he'd declared war on fashion instead of discussing the economy. Fox News treated the outfit like it was an act of treason. Meanwhile, Obama calmly addressed foreign policy, probably wondering if everyone had lost their sanity. It was a defining moment in absurd political outrage, the day an entire country debated khaki. Obama later joked about it, saying, "It was a nice suit." The incident became a meme, a reminder that sometimes the smallest non-issues become the loudest headlines. Decades from now, historians will study the tan suit scandal as proof that Americans can turn anything, literally anything, into a culture war. In the end, Obama stayed cool, proving that beige may fade, but pettiness is forever. 22. Donald Trump's Sharpie hurricane. In 2019, Hurricane Dorian was barreling toward the southeastern U.S., and President Donald Trump wanted to show he was on top of things. During a televised briefing, he held up an official weather map showing the projected storm path, except someone had clearly taken a black Sharpie and extended the hurricane's cone into Alabama, a state the storm was never going to touch. When meteorologists corrected him, Trump doubled down, insisting the map was totally accurate. The internet went feral, memes exploded, late-night hosts rejoiced, and the National Weather Service had to issue a real statement clarifying that no, Alabama was not under threat from a presidential doodle. Thus was born Sharpiegate, the first natural disaster ever edited with office supplies. It was classic Trump, confident, defiant, and deeply allergic to admitting error. Future historians will study that map as a symbol of 21st century politics, when the line between fact and marker ink got permanently blurred. 23. Harry Truman's Dewey defeats Truman moment. In 1948, President Harry Truman pulled off the greatest plot twist in political history. Polls predicted he'd lose badly to Thomas Dewey. Newspapers were so confident they literally printed the headline "Dewey defeats Truman" before the results were even in. When Truman actually won, he posed for a photo holding the false headline with the biggest grin in presidential history. The moment became a masterpiece of irony, proof that you should never underestimate a guy who ran a failed haberdashery and still made it to the Oval Office. Truman had campaigned tirelessly across the country by train, shaking hands and roasting reporters who'd written him off. His victory wasn't just an election win, it was a personal revenge tour against bad polling and premature journalism. Every modern politician who ever staged a comeback owes a thank you card to Harry Truman, the man who literally turned fake news into a victory lap. 24. Abraham Lincoln's goat beard decision. Abraham Lincoln's most iconic feature, his beard, wasn't his idea. In 1860, while running for president, he received a letter from an 11-year-old girl named Grace Bedell. She wrote, "All the ladies like whiskers, and they would tease their husbands to vote for you." Lincoln, who at that point looked like a very tall broom, took her advice and grew a beard. It worked. The beard softened his face, gave him instant gravitas, and became part of American iconography. When he later met Grace in person, he thanked her, saying she had probably helped him win the election. So, one child's casual fashion suggestion reshaped presidential history. Without Grace, we might remember Lincoln not as the wise, bearded emancipator, but as the lanky lawyer who looked perpetually surprised. Sometimes the most powerful political consultant in history is just a kid with an opinion and good timing. 25. Dwight D. Eisenhower's golf obsession. Dwight Eisenhower led the Allies to victory in World War II, but once he hit the White House, his toughest battle was against a small white ball. Ike loved golf so much he installed a putting green on the South Lawn and reportedly played more than 800 rounds during his presidency. He'd call press conferences just to justify his hobby, arguing that golf relieved presidential tension. When he wasn't golfing, he was thinking about golf. He even had a tree on the 17th hole at Augusta National removed because it kept getting in his way. The man literally ordered a botanical execution for his handicap. His critics complained he was too relaxed, but Eisenhower didn't care. He'd already beaten Hitler. Congress was just a tougher course. In the end, Ike proved you can run a global superpower and still prioritize your short game. 26. Gerald Ford's gravity problem. Gerald Ford was the only president never elected to either the presidency or the vice presidency, and gravity seemed determined to remind him of that. Ford became infamous for tripping, falling, and colliding with everything from airplane stairs to banquet tables. He once stumbled exiting Air Force One and turned it into a full somersault broadcast worldwide. Comedians loved it. Chevy Chase built his Saturday Night Live career on Ford impressions that mostly involved falling over furniture. But here's the twist. Ford was actually one of the most athletic presidents in history, a star football player at Michigan. He just had terrible timing and worse luck. Despite the clumsiness, Ford was kind, pragmatic, and scandal-free, a political unicorn. Unfortunately, history remembers him not for pardoning Nixon or stabilizing the nation, but for proving that even presidents need handrails. 27. Joe Biden's Whisper Campaign. In 2021, President Joe Biden gave a press conference where he leaned into the microphone and whispered, yes, whispered, his answers. It was meant to emphasize key points about the economy, but instead it sounded like your grandpa telling you a secret about how he beat the price of gas in 1974. The internet immediately crowned it the whisper heard around the world. Clips went viral, memes multiplied, and late-night shows played it on loop with horror movie music. Some called it creepy, others said it was refreshingly human. Either way, it reminded everyone that Biden's greatest strength, empathy, sometimes manifests like an NPR host trapped in a thriller. The whisper became part of his presidential folklore, a weird little quirk in a long political career. Because when you've been in Washington for 50 years, you learn one thing. If you can't shout over the noise, just whisper and hope the country leans in. So there you have it. 27 presidential facepalms that aged like spoiled milk in the sun. From parrot funerals to Sharpie hurricanes, America's leaders have proven that power doesn't always come with wisdom. Which one deserves a monument of shame? You decide. Drop your vote for humanity's dumbest commander-in-chief in the comments below, before someone accidentally declares war on their own snack.